What's up everybody and welcome to another edition of AGR's Pop Culture Reviews. Now I realize that most people don't know who Elizabeth Holmes is and probably never heard of her or even followed what happened with her company, Theranos. Now I've actually been well informed about this case, I've been following it for several years, and admittedly the only reason that I was going to watch the documentary on HBO is to see their take on it. But I was immediately enthralled with this documentary, and it's so relevant, especially right now, that I think everybody should watch this, and I kind of wanted to have a review and a discussion of these events. Now, I've mentioned this several times on the show. I'm originally from San Jose, California, the heart of Silicon Valley. But for the average person, most people when they think of Silicon Valley, they either think of Apple, Facebook, or Google, and that's about it. But there's a lot more going on in Silicon Valley than we realize, and I think the story of Theranos really kind of highlighted that. You know, growing up in the Valley was a wonderful experience. I loved growing up in San Jose, but when I recently returned there, you can hardly recognize it. Now, I know that people always say that you can never go home, and there have been several poems and essays written on it, but this is a little bit different. The nomenclature and the culture of San Jose has really changed because of all these giant companies, startups, incubators, and various other people that want to start $1 million company or have the next $1 billion idea, very similar to Elizabeth Holmes. And that's also part of the problem. San Francisco for several years now has undergone a cultural shift, mostly economic gentrification due to a lot of these large startups. Now, of course, it's very easy to demonize the tech companies for all these problems, and that's really oversimplifying it, and also, to be honest, that's a topic that can fill up a whole nother video. But San Francisco is in a crisis for the soul of the city, and if it hasn't already started now, San Jose will soon be facing the same crisis. Elizabeth Holmes would often speak of inflection points in the industry, and after watching this documentary, I have to say those words are pretty sobering and pretty damn chilling. But of course, for those of you who don't already know, you're probably asking yourself, who the hell is Elizabeth Holmes? And why is she relevant? Well, Elizabeth Holmes was a Stanford dropout who started her own company, Theranos, at the age of 19. And what she sought to do was pretty extraordinary in terms of the gargantuan scale, and basically she wanted to change the medical industry. Ultimately, her vision was very simple yet incredibly complex. And if her machine or device, called the Edison, was successfully produced, it would be able to perform hundreds of blood tests with a single drop of blood. The Edison device had the potential to completely revolutionize everything, as it would minimize, for the most part, inefficiencies and drastically reduce the cost of traditional blood work. But here's the thing, Silicon Valley has become a very strange place. And it's really the playground for a lot of personalities, these so-called gurus, and superstars, these captains of industry, that proclaim that they want to change certain paradigms within the industry. Silicon Valley's always looking for the next Steve Jobs. And indeed, one of the people that she had a somewhat unhealthy admiration for was Steve Jobs. One of the fascinating things about this documentary was that it really goes into the psychology behind this culture. Her wardrobe was very interesting and something that you kind of take notice of. She seemed to wear the same outfit every day, not the same clothes, but the same style of outfit, meaning the black turtleneck and the black trousers. She wouldn't think about it in the morning. In other words, this is something that Albert Einstein did. He basically bought the same suit for every day of the week so that he wouldn't have to think about what he would wear the next day and waste any time on anything else. As I mentioned before, I've been following this case for several years now, and I remember when I first heard about Elizabeth Holmes, I thought to myself, my god, she fits the perfect model for the next Silicon Valley guru. She's young, she's beautiful, she's intelligent, ambitious, she has these piercing blue eyes, but perhaps the most dangerous aspect about her is that she's incredibly charismatic. Just to add a little context as to how charming this woman could be, she surrounded herself with some giants in their respective fields. People like George Shultz, General Mattis, and various other heavyweights in the tech industry. Not to mention other investors like Betsy DeVos, Rupert Murdoch, and Henry Kissinger, for God's sakes. You see, given her personality, she had calculated that if she surrounded herself with powerful and influential people, this would hold off the regulators who would actually look into these things, and for a long time, it actually worked. In a business move that literally baffles me to this day, she was able to sign a lucrative deal with Walgreens to have the Theranos devices inside of the stores to perform blood work. And this is the first indication that something was very wrong at Theranos, and it became evidently clear that they were manipulating data and test results. In short, the Edison machines couldn't deliver on what Holmes promised. And it's at this point where professionals in the medical community really took notice and began to raise some serious concerns about the legitimacy of the test results. This is where things took a really dark turn, and many of the employees within Theranos saw the rise of a kind of cultist attitude. Workers were paranoid of one another. They were being surveilled, and the company became fragmented. Nobody knew what the other person was working on. Holmes became increasingly paranoid and hired an army of bodyguards to watch her 24/7. They actually treated her like she was the President of the United States. She even went so far as to bulletproof the glass in her own building. There's an interesting reference within the documentary that really talks about the duality of working at Theranos. There's the carpet world, which is above ground, where everybody loved Elizabeth Holmes and she could do no wrong, and everything was photogenic and picturesque. But there was also the tile world underneath the labs, where people were stressed out and had nothing but work, and it was all a big fiction. Of course, just like with most controversies, this story really blew up when it was picked up by an investigator from the Wall Street Journal. And one of the most fascinating aspects of this documentary is the subsequent interview with Holmes, which took several months to conduct, quickly turned into an unexpected deposition, as lawyers for Theranos were present in the meeting, and the exchanges are absolutely incredible. All I can say is thank God for whistleblowers. It was pretty clear at this point that Elizabeth Holmes was deliberately lying about the Edison machines, and she was actually using third-party machines to do the testing for her blood work. You know, I'm not sure what's more unnerving about this entire documentary, the fact that she was able to get this far with a complete illusion, or the fact that she genuinely believed the illusion. Of course, this brings up another greater issue about what's happening in Silicon Valley. The startups, the lack of regulation, ultimately the impact that Silicon Valley has on the rest of the world. The story of Elizabeth Holmes, unfortunately, is not unique, and is really a microcosm of the mentality of these companies, captains of industry, and how they can sometimes influence the world in negative ways. We can only hope that all future startups, or gurus, or whatever you want to call them, who are attempting to change the world, will watch this documentary and have a moment of pause, and understand that changing the world or attempting to change it to their vision can't come at all costs. Interestingly, and what I find pretty prophetic about the documentary, is that Holmes explains that she was influenced at an early age by reading books like Moby Dick, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. She remarked on how she thought that those were great sources of understanding leadership. But perhaps what Holmes failed to comprehend is that both Melville and Homer wrote cautionary tales about ill-fated campaigns and fanatical obsessions that would ultimately lead to your downfall. In 2018, Theranos, a company once valued at over $9 billion, was officially dissolved. Both Elizabeth Holmes and her partner Sunny Botwani were indicted for investment fraud and are currently awaiting trial. Now, there's a lot more to this documentary. I just kind of touched on some of the key points. This is a fascinating, if albeit somewhat disturbing, documentary. Ultimately, all of this was an illusion, but here's the thing that really kind of unnerved me. You may notice that Elizabeth Holmes speaks with a very deep and baritone voice. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not her real voice, and that's probably the creepiest thing about this. If you haven't been invested in this case for years like I have, I highly recommend that you watch the documentary because it is the condensed version, and you're really going to get a fascinating insight into probably one of the most bizarre cases of fraud to come out of Silicon Valley. Alright everybody, so that's my official review on HBO's documentary films, The Inventor, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley. As always, I thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next AGR's Pop Culture Reviews.
Can you tell us a secret?
I don't have many secrets. I'm